I'm going to guide you through what happens when you deal with some difficulty when you're reading fiction. First off, an overview. We're going to define what different reading levels are when you're reading fiction, some general strategies for reading, and then specific strategies for reading levels, and then I'm going to model for you. So, first off, as promised, let's define reading levels. We have word level, content level, and structural level. Word level deals with vocabulary, so terms in the story that you might run into that you're unfamiliar with. Content level deals with the content of the story, what's happening in the story, who is in the story, those elements of fiction that we've been dealing with. And then structural level is how is the text organized? What's happening and when? That's structural level. So here are some general strategies for reading, and these are ones that help no matter what your reading level, no matter where you're at, no matter whether you like reading or not. Here's some strategies. Be patient, stay focused, have a way to look up words you don't know, and stick to it. These are things that readers of all ages have to do. For example, I'm an English teacher. I know a lot of words in the dictionary, but I still have to look up words sometimes when I'm reading. And that's a sign that I'm growing my mind and I'm growing my vocabulary. So that's a good thing. So let's take a look at some specific reading level strategies. For word level, again, you're dealing with vocabulary. If you run into a word that you don't know in a story, try using context clues. You could always ask someone for help if you're really having trouble. Substitute, meaning put in a synonym for that word. So maybe there's a word that's a little bit complicated, but there's a synonym that's a bit simpler. You can just keep that one and keep that synonym in mind when you are reading through the story. And there's always the tried and true looking it up. A lot of stories you'll find have words that they already anticipate being difficult words to understand defined for you, especially the ones that we read here in class. So those can be helpful. Dictionary.com is also very helpful. If you're reading on a Kindle or another e reader, a lot of the time you can tap and hold on that word, and the e reader will define the word for you. There are lots of different ways besides a physical dictionary for you to look up words. Next, let's take a look at content level. Again, this is what's going on in the story, what's the conflict, things like that. You're going to need to keep track of those elements of fiction that we've been talking about. So keep track of the characters, keep track of the setting, keep track of the plot, look for problems that the characters are facing. Make sure that you are oriented as the reader. We've talked about orienting the reader before, where if you are oriented, that means you know where you are in the story, you know when what time period you're in, or at the very least when things are happening, you know who's in the story. So if you find yourself losing track and thinking, oh, wait, who is that again? That's a sign that you need to go back and look at something to make sure that you're still on track. And last but not least, let's take a look at structural level. Again, this has to deal with how the text is organized and if we're aware of how time is passing in the story. Something you could do for this one is keep a timeline as you read. This could be a mental timeline, or it could be something that you jot down either in the margins or on your own notebook. You could pay attention to verb tense too. A lot of the time, verb tense will shift if we are moving into a flashback, for example. Look for temporal words and cues, those words and phrases that we talked about that tell us that time is moving forward or backward in a story. And then make inferences using clues. Again, an inference is something that is not going to jump out at you. It's not said directly in the text, but it's something that you understand based on what you're reading. For example, if a character walks into the room and slams the door, you might make the inference that they're angry, even if that fact is not explicitly stated in the text. So, for our model today, we are going to revisit the circuit. You guys have read this story several times before, and I'm just going to tell you how I tackled this one when I read the story for the first time when I was getting ready to read it with you. So first I looked at word level. There were some words in there that maybe I had heard before or words that I had never heard before that I needed to stop and look up and make sure that I knew. For example, a sharecropper. I had heard that word before in my study of history years ago, but I didn't remember exactly what it was, so I looked it up, and that's a farmer who keeps some of the harvest and pays the owner of the land with some of the harvest. And then there were some words in there, especially in another language, that I didn't know, like braceros, who are people who pick fruit or vegetables, that I needed to look up as well. Again, having to stop and look up a new word is not a sign that you are not understanding the story properly. It's just a sign that your vocabulary is growing. There's nothing wrong with that. Next up, let's take a look at how I tackled the content level. So, there were a couple of moments in the story that I got a little confused or I needed to make sure that I was on the right track. So, on page 73, that's the first page of the story itself, I asked myself, what's going on here? Who is Ito? Why was Sunday the last time he was seen? And that was something that just I was asking as the story was going. Sometimes you'll find that you'll ask a question and a story will answer that question maybe a couple of pages later or maybe a couple of paragraphs down the line. And this is what happened with me. He was the sharecropper for whom the family worked, and the season is now over. So the narrator is feeling sad. Next up, here's another question that I asked was I was startled. I had not heard English for months. That's something that the narrator says, and that struck me in a way that made me ask the question, why not? And the answer was he'd been working in the fields, not in school, and speaking Spanish. Again, this is an anticipation question that I asked, thinking, okay, well, why is that true? Why hasn't he heard English for months? And then the story eventually answers that question for me. That's a sign that you're thinking about the story. These are good questions to be asking. It's good to have questions when you're reading a story. Otherwise, it's way too predictable. Then next, when I saw the last line, I saw that everything we owned is neatly packed in cardboard boxes. Not only did I have an emotional reaction to this because I understood that that means that they're leaving, but I also started asking the question, why are they leaving again? What could have gone wrong? This is a speculative question. I'm speculating, meaning I'm not going to get the answer to this question in the text, but it's just something that I'm thinking about. And it's a natural curiosity that you would have as the reader to ask, well, why are they leaving again? What's going on? Why can't they stay? Now, let's take a look at how I tackled the structural level, how the text is organized, and how time was passing. I paid attention for those words and phrases that I've told you guys about before, like months of the year. We have August. I've paid attention to when he mentions the time of day, like night, day, afternoon, morning. You see, that night I could not sleep. He mentions the time a little before 5 o'clock in the morning. So we know that it's very early in the morning. And then another time, there was a flashback in the story of Papa buying the car, and that was a memory. And I needed to make sure I understood that that wasn't happening in the main events of the current part of the story. It was a flashback. So, again, that's one way that I was aware that time is kind of moving backward a little bit and then it moves forward again when we get to the actual main events of the story. So, to recap, we defined reading levels, we talked about some general reading strategies, we talked about some reading level strategies, and then you had a model shown to you. Just remember that when reading fiction, we all meet challenges with vocabulary, content, and structure. This happens in middle school, it's going to happen in high school, it happens when you are reading on an adult level. No matter what, you never stop asking questions and you never stop expanding your vocabulary. So just be aware that this is something that is completely natural and it's part of the reading process. Just be on the lookout for these challenges in your own reading. And now you have ways to tackle those challenges when you see them. Thanks for listening.